All right. And so we're thankful that you have joined us on tonight. And our speaker tonight for our Tuesday evening, 6:30, September 28th call is my nephew, but he's not here because he's my nephew. He's here because he has a word. Reverend Dr. Mark Andrew Jefferson. He's been to Bethel any number of times. I mean, a number of times over the years. And we thank God that he has blessed him academically with a bachelor's, a master divinity, and a PhD from Emory University. He is now a professor of preaching at the Virginia Seminary and Episcopal Seminary in Alexandria, Virginia, and he's doing well. Literally, he has preached. He might tell you, I think he's preached in just about every state in the United States. Amen. I got about 4 or 5 states, and I'm 55. So I'm not going, I don't know, Brother Foster, if I'm going to catch up. But I just thank God. The Lord has taken him places. I think he's going to preach in Africa pretty soon and different other parts. And I don't have to say, he's very proud. His grandmother, Doretha Turner, is on tap on tonight. And so without any further ado, my beloved nephew, in whom I'm well pleased, would you receive him tonight, the Reverend Dr. Mark Andrew Jefferson? Hear him as he inspires us on.
Well, number one, Bethel, it is always, always, always a pleasure to be with you. It makes my heart glad every time that I think about you. You all have been with me for many years on this journey. You all have listened to me into some form of maturity. And so your caring, your kindness, your concern, the hugs, the support, all of that has been an instrumental part of whatever I've been able to do. So it is indeed my pleasure. It is good to be here with my family. I'm glad that my uncle extended this opportunity to me, and I'm glad that we were able to work it out. I just want you all to know that you all have the finest pastor in the land. And I don't say that just because that's my kinfolk, but I say that because I travel around and I teach preachers and I meet people, and they don't get any better than that. So I am grateful that you all are there to support him, and he's there to support you all as everyone moves toward what God would have them to be. I don't want this to be a sermon in that kind of way, but I just want to talk to you for a little bit. There's something that's been on my heart, and I just feel like this is a good venue to explore that with you all, especially for the times that we're in. So I'm gonna kick it old school. I'm gonna read from the King James, and I'm gonna go from Mark, the Gospel of Mark, and we're gonna look at verse 49 and verse 50. So we're gonna look at those two verses, and I just want to talk about what the Spirit is leading me to share about that. And it says, "For everyone shall be salted with fire, and every sacrifice shall be salted with salt." Salt is good, but if salt has lost its saltiness, where will ye season it? Have salt in yourselves, and have peace with one another. For everyone shall be salted with fire, and every sacrifice shall be salted with salt. Salt is good, but if salt has lost its saltiness, where will ye season it? I want to talk to you for a few moments this evening, and I want to talk about salty saints in an unsavory world. Salty saints in an unsavory world. It seems as if the times were speeding up. When you read the Gospel of Mark, you get the feeling of a narrative or a story that's in motion. Mark doesn't start from the virgin birth. He starts with Jesus on the move. And this Jesus came preaching, teaching. God's mission in the world was urgent to Mark. Hence its shortness and composition. It is concise, it is well written in the sense that it tells a story of a God in motion. And this God in motion was after the human condition. And this human condition in many ways has strayed away, has chosen, has sided with the carnality that is present in this earth realm. And so God is at a place with humanity in which Jesus is so moving towards Jerusalem, the place where these types of carnal relationships and institutions found themselves to be. And so Jesus is moving with pace toward Jerusalem. He's acquiring these disciples who need development, who need this exposure because they have wittingly yet unwittingly signed up for the journey of lifetime and into eternity. And so what is interesting about this text is that Jesus has just had this interesting experience on the Mount of Transfiguration where he brought his inner circle with him and they observed God doing these miraculous things. And from that experience, Jesus then goes down, sees about a young man who was grabbed by spirit. But it's interesting that this spirit that grabbed this young man after this mountaintop experience seemingly manifests in the disciples in the next set of verses, because the spirit that Jesus cast out seems to show up in these disciples because these disciples are now asking and disputing among themselves who's going to be the greatest. It seemed like these people who were supposed to exorcise demons, the reason why they were unable, I surmise, is that they were unable because they were yet possessed themselves. So Jesus having to perform this exorcism, this reimagination, this reorientation, this reconnection of self as these disciples found themselves pursuing greatness of the world. They saw themselves being higher than the next, occupying positions that would allow them to lord power over their neighbor. That was not God's way. So Jesus in many ways confronts that spirit of false greatness that is alive in those saints at that time, but also alive in us. That feeling of having to be better than, having to be the one who puts down others in order to be able to lift self up. Jesus comes against that as he's moving toward Jerusalem. He's taking these disciples on this journey. And as it's time to start to make this pivot, Jesus ends up with this discourse at the end of the chapter that begins to set the stage for how we're supposed to understand ourselves in this world. Because the world that Jesus was occupying and taking up space and changing was a world that was rife with oppression. The Roman condition was not the friend of the Jew. The average Jew found themselves in extenuating circumstances, trying to eke out a living in a world that was changing, in which they were losing their freedoms. The world in many ways began to take on the flavor of flavorlessness. In short, the Romans in many ways accelerated the Hellenization that happened before, so that the Romans sought to make everything an extension of Rome so that the world would look the same. So as Rome began to expand its territory and implement its practices throughout its empire, the world began to lose its seasoning. This losing of seasoning, this blanding of the context, put these followers of Jesus, at odds with empire. For this Jesus that they are following is preaching a different gospel, representing a different kingdom. He is embodying another ethic in the world, one in which God prioritizes the humanness of humans so that they can then live into the fullness of what God had them to be. Rome seeking to subjugate, God seeking to liberate, brought these two situations into a head. And what was at stake, my sisters and my brothers, was the very essence of what it meant to be a follower of Jesus. Jesus uses salt in this passage as a way of metaphorically bringing attention to the identity that makes Christians who they are. These followers of Jesus in this way are supposed to be known for an attribute that was to have value, an attribute that was to be able to preserve, an attribute that was able to change the nature of things. Salt was not just table salt, but salt was essential to life. Salt is essential to our well-being. So Jesus is saying that what it means to be Christian is tied to this essence of your distinctiveness as salt. But what's at stake is that in this bland time that these disciples were in, they were running the risk of losing their saltiness. This pursuit of artificial greatness put them in a context in which the saltiness that was their inheritance became at risk by them pursuing greatness by the world. This worldly greatness that they were pursuing put them in direct contrast with the mission that they were on. The mission was to head to Jerusalem. The mission was to be able to go there with the Messiah. Though they didn't fully understand the road that they were on, they thought they had an idea, but the idea that they thought they were on was detoured by them seeking to be great, and Jesus having to remind them that the essence of what this is about is not about being a Caesar, being a Roman procurator. What's at stake is the very essence of your life. And my sisters and my brothers, we live in a world in which we are in unsavory times. We are in times that are rife with immorality, rife with anger, rife with violence, rife with corruption, rife with all the things that seemingly take the joy out of life. And oftentimes Christians, because we exist in this world and we find ourselves subject to its limitations, we find ourselves like these disciples looking around at other things, seeking to be great, seeking to stray away from the core convictions of our Christian identity. And by doing that, we are at risk, like Jesus is saying, of salt losing its saltiness. For salt loses its saltiness in terms of context. A context that you're in can shape the saltiness of your situation. So I was curious, how does salt lose its saltiness? And upon further research, I realized that people could actually steal your salt. What do I mean? So let's say I had a sack of salt and I was going to go and trade this at the market. But if, let's say, someone wanted to steal my salt but not tip me off that it was stolen, what they could do is take my bag of salt and soak it in water. And through the process of osmosis, the salt would literally leave its shape. It would leave the actual crystal, and the salt would then manifest in the water, so that the water that it was placed in would take all the saltiness out. So by the time the person goes to trade in that salt and to interact with that salt in terms of economic means, they come to realize that though it looks like salt, though it used to be salt, the thing that makes it what it is, the power that gives it its distinction, has been lost due to the context that it was placed in. And oftentimes we find ourselves looking around, trying to figure out, have I lost my zeal? Why have I not found my mojo? Why does it feel like my relationship with God is askew? And it could be that we find ourselves in contexts in which we've lost elements of our saltiness. We've risked our saltiness, our distinctiveness, the power that makes us who we are, our God-given endowment. We miss the fact that what's at stake is that by being in context that try to draw out of us who we are and what we are, we miss the power of God at work. And we run the risk of losing our saltiness. In another passage in the gospel, it says that if salt loses its saltiness, what is its purpose? How can you put salt back in it? How can you revive it? How can you re-energize it? That salt is worthless and to be trampled out underfoot. My sisters and brothers, we live in an age now where much of what we understand to be Christian is lacking the power that that's due its name. Many churches do the things of a church but don't have the power. Many Christians call the name of Christ but don't move in the power therein. And I believe that many people have put themselves in jeopardy of losing that saltiness, losing that distinctive identity that makes them who they are. And by running that risk, they put themselves at the mercy of the times, the seasons, and the shifting circumstances. God is calling us to be salty saints, saints that leave a residue when they're there, saints that preserve things, saints that bring the flavor out of things, saints that change the texture and the composition of things, saints that if they were removed, this world would not be the same. So in this season of pandemic, in the season in which connection is more precarious and more difficult, and we have to go the extra mile to stay connected, in this season, God is asking us, God is calling us, we're being compelled to be salty. Not salty as the world would say, oh, she is salty. No. Jesus is turning that paradigm around. Jesus is commanding us to be the salt that we have been created to be. And out of us being salty saints for this season, for us being salty saints in an unsavory world, by us being what God called us to be, we just might change the world for the glory of God. Thank you all for allowing me to be with you tonight. It is